I've been sitting on this story for years, mostly because I never knew how to frame it. Some people would call it revenge. Some would call it vandalism. A few, if they knew the whole picture, might call it the first time I realized I was capable of something genuinely bad. Either way, I set a competitor's car on fire. Not in a movie style explosion, not in some dramatic blaze with sirens and slow motion regret. It was uglier, quieter, and more personal than that. And it happened during a period of my life when everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Back then, I ran a small mobile auto detailing business. Nothing fancy, just me, a battered van, a pressure washer, and the belief that if I worked harder than everyone else, I'd eventually claw my way into something stable. I was in my late 20s, living paycheck to paycheck, convinced I was one good month away from finally breathing. Then Evan showed up. Evan wasn't just another guy with a bucket and a sponge. He had money behind him, family money, investors, shiny wrapped trucks, uniforms, online ads everywhere. Within 6 months, he was popping up at apartment complexes and office parks I'd serviced for years. Clients stopped answering my texts. Regulars suddenly found someone cheaper. I watched my calendar hollow out while his Instagram filled up with smiling customers and glossy before and after shots. At first, I told myself it was just business. Then I found out he'd been undercutting me by name, telling people I overcharged, telling them I did shoddy work. One customer even forwarded me a screenshot of Evan calling me some dude with a hose. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, exactly. Not at first. It was a slow, sour pressure in my chest, a feeling of being erased, of being made small by someone who didn't even know me. The night I saw Evan's branded sedan parked behind a strip mall, gleaming under a flickering security light, I didn't think I'm going to commit a crime. I thought, I'm tired of losing. And that thought felt dangerous in a way I didn't yet understand. This is the story of what happened next. After that night behind the strip mall, I started noticing Evan's stuff everywhere. His trucks, his stickers, his stupid minimalist logo slapped on coffee cups at gas stations where I used to leave my cards. It felt like he was colonizing my territory, even though, rationally, I knew I didn't own any of it. That's the funny thing about resentment. It doesn't present itself as hatred. It presents itself as fairness. I told myself he was a bully. I told myself he was lying about me, stealing clients through deception, and therefore any pushback was justified. Not violence, obviously. I wasn't thinking in those terms yet. More like balancing scales. I started mentally inventorying all the ways he'd wronged me. The accounts I lost, the slow months afterward, the late rent payment, the overdraft fee, the way my girlfriend at the time started looking at me differently when money got tight. Every inconvenience got tied back to him. I even tried confronting him once. I caught him outside an office complex, leaning against one of his trucks, scrolling his phone, like he owned oxygen. I introduced myself, told him I'd been servicing that complex for years. He smiled, not apologetically, not aggressively, just mildly amused. Yeah, man, he said, it's business. You gotta adapt. That sentence should be harmless. People say it all the time. But the way he said it, like he was explaining gravity to a child, made my ears ring. Adapt. As if I hadn't already cut my prices to the bone. As if I wasn't already working 12-hour days. As if I was just lazy. I walked away without yelling. I even shook his hand. On the outside, I played the reasonable adult. On the inside, I started imagining his world cracking. Not his face, not his body. His stuff, the trucks, the equipment, the image. I'd be lying if I said I consciously planned arson at that stage. It was more abstract. When people imagine planning a crime, they picture diagrams, lists, checklists, maybe a corkboard with strings like in a detective show. Mine looked more like avoidance. I didn't wake up and say, tonight's the night. Instead, I started making tiny, deniable adjustments to my life that only made sense if something was coming. I began parking my van farther from my apartment building. Not for safety, not for convenience. I told myself it was because the closer spots were always taken. I started wearing older clothes when I went out at night. Stuff I wouldn't miss if it got ruined. I cleaned my van more thoroughly than usual, getting rid of random clutter, old rags, half-empty bottles of cleaning chemicals. It felt like being organized. But there was an edge to it I didn't want to name. I also stopped talking about Evan. Before, I'd complain about him to anyone who would listen. Friends, family, my ex when she still answered texts. Then I went quiet. Part of me didn't want witnesses to my obsession. Part of me didn't want anyone accidentally talking me out of it. In my head, I framed all of this as self-improvement. I'm getting my life together. I'm simplifying. I'm focusing. The truth was uglier. I was slowly arranging my world so that if I made a terrible decision, it would be easier. I ran through scenarios constantly. What if someone saw me? What if a camera caught my face? What if I panicked and did something stupid? The solutions I came up with were vague and half-formed. Stay calm. Don't rush. Leave quickly. Nothing about it felt like a professional criminal's plan. It felt like a nervous person rehearsing for a test they didn't want to take. I also spent a lot of time imagining how I'd feel afterward. Relief, vindication, maybe even a sense of justice. I rarely imagined fear or regret. That omission says a lot. The night I finally decided wasn't marked by a dramatic trigger. No new insult. No fresh loss. It was a mediocre day. A small job. A polite rejection from a property manager. A microwave dinner eaten standing up. I got in my van around 11 p.m. with no clear destination. I didn't say I'm going to the strip mall, I just drove. By the time I turned onto that familiar street, my hands were already sweaty. That's when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't debating anymore. I wasn't weighing options. I was executing a choice I'd made in pieces over weeks. And there was a strange calm in that realization. Not peace, not confidence. More like numb momentum. The kind that makes you feel less like a person and more like a shopping cart rolling downhill. I parked where I always did. I killed the engine. I sat there in the dark, staring at the silhouette of Evan's car, and for the first time, I admitted to myself, I am here to hurt something. I sat there longer than I expected. No music, no phone, just the ticking sound of my engine cooling and the distant hum of traffic somewhere beyond the buildings. I kept waiting for a last-minute surge of morality, some internal emergency brake. It didn't come. Instead, my brain started offering compromises. Just walk over there. Just take a closer look. You don't have to do anything. So I did. I stepped out of the van and immediately felt exposed, even though the lot was empty. Every shadow looked like a person. Every distant noise sounded closer than it was. I remember noticing stupid details. A cracked curb, a faded parking line, a plastic bag fluttering against a fence. My brain clung to these things like it was trying to pretend this was just another ordinary moment. The car looked smaller up close, less symbolic, more human in a way. Someone's property, someone's daily transportation, something that represented hours of another person's life. That gave me a flicker of hesitation. Then I saw the logo again. Bright, clean, confident, and the hesitation curdled. I didn't touch the car at first. I circled it slowly, pretending I was just some guy cutting through the lot. My heart was hammering hard enough that I was convinced it had to be audible. I kept thinking about fingerprints. I didn't know much about forensics, but I knew enough from TV to be afraid of surfaces. I pulled my hands into my sleeves. Another tiny rationalization. See? I'm being careful. I'm not reckless. I'm not some idiot. That thought made me feel disturbingly competent. The thing I had bought at the gas station felt heavier than it should have in my pocket. Not physically, morally. It felt like it was dragging me forward. I took it out, stared at it, then shoved it back in, like maybe if I didn't look at it too long, it wouldn't become real. I walked back toward my van. For about 3 steps, I genuinely thought I was going to leave. I even imagined the relief of driving away and telling myself I'd dodged a bullet. Then another thought slipped in. If you leave now, you'll still be this angry tomorrow. That idea scared me more than getting caught. I turned around. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. I told myself something that, in hindsight, is one of the most dangerous lies I've ever believed. I'm not doing this to hurt a person. I'm just damaging an object. As if that distinction made me noble. As if objects don't represent effort, stability, identity. As if destroying something someone relies on isn't a form of violence. I crouched near the car, staying low even though no one was there. The world felt narrow, like everything outside a 10-foot radius had stopped existing. This was the last moment where I could still walk away without consequences. I knew that, and I chose not to. I wish I could tell you there was some dramatic internal scream. Some final surge of this is wrong. What I felt instead was a hollow, floaty sensation, like my body was moving at a half second ahead of my mind. I pulled the item from my pocket. I didn't examine it, didn't admire it, didn't even really look at it. Looking would have meant acknowledging exactly what I was about to do. My hands were clumsy, not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because adrenaline turns fine motor skills into a suggestion. I remember fumbling, swearing silently, forcing myself to slow down. Don't rush. Don't make noise. Don't drop anything. Those thoughts looped in my head like a broken record. The parking lot felt impossibly quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Pressurized quiet. The kind where you become aware of every tiny sound your body makes. Your breath, fabric shifting, the faint scuff of your shoe against asphalt. I positioned myself near the front of the car, staying low. At some point, my brain tried one last defense. You can still stop. You haven't done anything irreversible yet. That thought lasted maybe half a second. Then I did the irreversible thing. There was no explosion, no dramatic whoosh, just a small, ugly beginning. For a moment, nothing happened at all. My heart slammed into my throat. A stupid, irrational fear flashed through me. What if I did all this and it doesn't even work? Then I saw movement, subtle at first, a flicker that could have been mistaken for imagination. It took a couple of seconds to register that it was real. When it did, a wave of conflicting sensations crashed into me all at once. Triumph, terror, disbelief, a strange, sick fascination. I'd crossed the line. Not in theory, not in fantasy, in reality. My brain screamed, "Leave! Now!" I stood up too fast, got dizzy, had to steady myself. That delay felt catastrophic, even though it was probably only a second. I forced myself to turn away. Every instinct wanted to look back, to confirm, to witness. I didn't let myself. I walked quickly at first. Then, worried that quick looked suspicious, I forced myself into something resembling a casual pace. Each step away from the car felt heavier than the last, like my shoes were magnetized to the asphalt. Behind me, I heard a faint sound. Not shouting, not alarms. Just a subtle crackling that I hadn't heard before. That sound punched a hole straight through my chest. Because it meant this was really happening. Because it meant I was no longer the guy who had merely thought about doing something awful. I reached my van with shaking hands, climbed in, and sat there for a split second, staring at the steering wheel like I'd never seen one before. Then I started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I finally broke my rule and glanced in the rearview mirror. I saw light. Not huge flames, not an inferno, but unmistakable light where there shouldn't have been any. My stomach dropped. There was no satisfaction, no rush of victory, just a cold sinking realization. You can't undo this. And I drove away anyway. I didn't take a clever route home. No winding back roads. No elaborate evasive maneuvers. I drove the exact same way I always did. That fact still messes with me. I think part of me wanted to pretend nothing had changed, like muscle memory could overwrite reality. My hands were clamped so hard around the steering wheel that my fingers hurt. I kept expecting sirens. Any second now. Blue and red lights filling my mirrors, a loudspeaker ordering me to pull over. Every car behind me felt like a cop. Every car coming toward me felt like a witness. None of them did anything. Traffic lights behaved normally. Other drivers behaved normally. The world didn't react at all to what I had just done. That was deeply unsettling. I realized something on that drive. I had always imagined that if I ever did something truly bad, I would feel transformed, like I'd crossed into a different version of myself, but I still felt me. Same thoughts, same memories, same stupid mental commentary. The only difference was a new, heavy secret sitting in my chest. I kept replaying the moment I looked in the mirror. That glow. Not big, not cinematic, just undeniable. I had no idea how fast things would escalate after I left. My brain filled in worst-case scenarios. What if the fire spread to other cars? What if someone wandered through the lot? What if there was a building closer than I realized? Each possibility felt like a fresh punch to the ribs. I told myself over and over, you didn't want anyone hurt, as if intention could rewrite physics. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I sat in the van for several minutes before getting out. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. I also didn't want to risk acting weird around anyone. Eventually, I forced myself inside. I didn't turn on lights, didn't eat, didn't sit. I just paced. Back and forth, back and forth. Every sound outside my apartment made my heart spike. A car door, footsteps, someone laughing in the distance. I kept checking my phone even though I didn't know what I was checking for. News alerts, local fire reports, police scanners. Nothing. The silence was torture. Around 2 a.m., I convinced myself that if nothing had happened by now, maybe the fire had burned itself out quickly. Maybe it was minor. Maybe it looked accidental. I clung to that, maybe like a life raft. But underneath it was a darker realization. If nothing happened, if no one contacted me, if no investigation reached me, that wouldn't mean I was innocent. It would mean I got away with it, and I wasn't sure which outcome scared me more. I eventually lay down on my bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that small, growing light. Not as spectacle, not as power, as proof. Proof that I was capable of doing something I'd always believed was beyond me. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion won. But it wasn't rest. It was more like my brain crashing. And when I woke up, the first thought in my head wasn't relief. It was, what did I really do? I woke up late. Not the kind of late where you feel refreshed. The kind where your body feels heavy and your mouth tastes wrong, like you've been breathing guilt instead of air. For about 3 seconds, I forgot. Then memory snapped back into place. Not gradually. All at once. My heart started pounding before I even opened my eyes. I checked my phone immediately. No missed calls, no texts, no notifications. That should have felt good. It didn't. It felt like standing in the calm eye of a storm you weren't sure had passed or was just gathering strength. I tried to distract myself with normal routines. Shower, coffee, scrolling through social media. Every single thing felt performative, like I was acting out the role of guy having a regular morning. I couldn't stop thinking about the strip mall, about what it looked like now, about whether the car was still there, about whether I'd recognize my own handiwork in daylight. Around noon, I made the worst possible decision. I drove back. I told myself I just happened to have a job nearby. That part was technically true, but I took a small detour that put me on the same street. As I turned the corner, my chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. From a distance, I could already see something was different. The familiar shape of Evan's sedan was there, but wrong, darkened, uneven. As I got closer, details came into focus. The front end was badly damaged, paint blistered, plastic melted into warped, drooping shapes. The hood looked like it had aged 50 years overnight. There was a faint smell still lingering in the air. Not sharp, not smoky, just stale and unpleasant, like the ghost of something burned. No police tape, no caution cones, no crowd, just a dead looking car sitting quietly in the same spot. That somehow made it worse. It looked sad, not dramatic, not symbolic, just ruined. I didn't stop the van. I didn't slow down much, but I saw enough. And what I felt wasn't triumph. It was a sinking, hollow heaviness. I kept thinking, someone had to deal with this morning. Someone woke up, went outside, and found their car like that. Someone stood there, probably confused at first, then angry, then stressed, then panicked about insurance, transportation, work, money. I had imagined Evan as a symbol, a villain, a logo. Seeing the damaged car forced me to confront the fact that I'd impacted a real person's day, week, maybe year. I drove away with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Part of me whispered, "He deserved it." Another part whispered, "You didn't fix anything." Both voices felt true. That internal split was new. Before, my anger had felt clean and focused. Now it was muddy, complicated, contaminated by guilt I couldn't ignore. And when I got to my actual job, I went through the motions like a robot. Smiled at a customer. Did decent work. Collected payment. All while carrying the knowledge that I was no longer just a struggling business owner. I was a person who had intentionally destroyed something that didn't belong to him. No one around me knew. They joked, they complained about traffic, they talked about weekend plans, and I kept thinking, if you knew what I did, you wouldn't stand this close to me. That isolation was suffocating. Not because people rejected me, but because I had secretly removed myself from the category of normal person. I'd always believed there was a line. Good people on one side, bad people on the other. Now I wasn't sure where I stood. All I knew was that I had crossed something, and I couldn't uncross it. The days after blurred together, not in a peaceful way, in a tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop way. Every unknown number that called my phone made my stomach flip. Every knock in my apartment complex hallway made my pulse spike. I started noticing police cars everywhere. Logically, I knew they were always there, but now each one felt personal, like they were orbiting me. I Googled local crime news obsessively. Car fire strip mall. Arson investigation, city name. Vehicle fire suspicious. Most of the time, nothing relevant came up. I woke up late. Not the kind of late where you feel refreshed. The kind where your body feels heavy and your mouth tastes wrong, like you've been breathing guilt instead of air. For about 3 seconds, I forgot. Then memory snapped back into place. Not gradually. All at once. My heart started pounding before I even opened my eyes. I checked my phone immediately. No missed calls, no texts, no notifications. That should have felt good. It didn't. It felt like standing in the calm eye of a storm you weren't sure had passed or was just gathering strength. I tried to distract myself with normal routines. Shower, coffee, scrolling through social media. Every single thing felt performative, like I was acting out the role of guy having a regular morning. I couldn't stop thinking about the strip mall, about what it looked like now, about whether the car was still there, about whether I'd recognize my own handiwork in daylight. Around noon, I made the worst possible decision. I drove back. I told myself I just happened to have a job nearby. That part was technically true, but I took a small detour that put me on the same street. As I turned the corner, my chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. From a distance, I could already see something was different. The familiar shape of Evan's sedan was there, but wrong, darkened, uneven. As I got closer, details came into focus. The front end was badly damaged, paint blistered, plastic melted into warped, drooping shapes. The hood looked like it had aged 50 years overnight. There was a faint smell still lingering in the air. Not sharp, not smoky, just stale and unpleasant, like the ghost of something burned. No police tape, no caution cones, no crowd, just a dead-looking car sitting quietly in the same spot. That somehow made it worse. It looked sad, not dramatic, not symbolic, just ruined. I didn't stop the van. I didn't slow down much, but I saw enough. And what I felt wasn't triumph. It was a sinking, hollow heaviness. I kept thinking, someone had to deal with this morning. Someone woke up, went outside, and found their car like that. Someone stood there, probably confused at first, then angry, then stressed, then panicked about insurance, transportation, work, money. I had imagined Evan as a symbol, a villain, a logo. Seeing the damaged car forced me to confront the fact that I'd impacted a real person's day, week, maybe year. I drove away with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Part of me whispered, "He deserved it." Another part whispered, "You didn't fix anything." Both voices felt true. That internal split was new. Before, my anger had felt clean and focused. Now it was muddy, complicated, contaminated by guilt I couldn't ignore. And when I got to my actual job, I went through the motions like a robot, smiled at a customer, did decent work, collected payment, all while carrying the knowledge that I was no longer just a struggling business owner. I was a person who had intentionally destroyed something that didn't belong to him. No one around me knew. They joked, they complained about traffic, they talked about weekend plans, and I kept thinking, if you knew what I did, you wouldn't stand this close to me. That isolation was suffocating. Not because people rejected me, but because I had secretly removed myself from the category of normal person. I'd always believed there was a line. Good people on one side, bad people on the other. Now I wasn't sure where I stood. All I knew was that I had crossed something, and I couldn't uncross it. The days after blurred together, not in a peaceful way, in a tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop way. Every unknown number that called my phone made my stomach flip. Every knock in my apartment complex hallway made my pulse spike. I started noticing police cars everywhere. Logically, I knew they were always there, but now each one felt personal, like they were orbiting me. I Googled local crime news obsessively. Car fire strip mall. Arson investigation, city name. Vehicle fire suspicious. Most of the time, nothing relevant came up. Once I found a tiny blurb. Early morning vehicle fire damages sedan in commercial parking lot. No injuries reported. Cause under investigation. No names. No details. 3 sentences. That little paragraph felt heavier than anything I'd read in my life. It meant it was real enough to be news, but vague enough to offer me no clarity. I read it over and over, searching for hidden clues. Was it being treated as arson? Was it being written off as mechanical? Was there a suspect? None of that was answered, which meant my imagination filled in the blanks. I started mentally rehearsing police interviews I hadn't been asked to give. Where was I that night? Who can vouch for me? Why did I go to that gas station? Why did I take that route home? Every mundane detail of my life suddenly felt incriminating. I also became hyper-aware of my own behavior. Was I acting guilty? Was I quieter than usual? Was I overcompensating by being too friendly? I had no baseline anymore. I couldn't trust my own perception. The worst part, nothing happened. No cops. No insurance investigator. No angry confrontation. Evan didn't show up at my door. In some twisted way, I had expected a direct reckoning. Yelling, accusations, punishment. Instead, I got ambiguity. And ambiguity is a special kind of psychological torture. Because as long as nothing definitive happens, you're suspended in a permanent state of maybe. Maybe they're building a case. Maybe they have footage they haven't analyzed yet. Maybe they'll knock tomorrow. Maybe next week. Maybe never. I started sleeping poorly. When I did sleep, I had dreams where I was back in the parking lot, except this time I couldn't move. The fire would start, and I'd be frozen, unable to leave, screaming without sound. I woke up drenched in sweat more than once. At the same time, A small, ugly thought began creeping in. If I get away with this, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. I hated myself for thinking that, but I couldn't pretend it didn't exist. It was the same logic that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. Minimizing, downplaying, reframing. I noticed something else too. My anger toward Evan didn't disappear, but it lost its sharpness. It didn't feel righteous anymore. It felt tired, like an old wound that had started to scab over. Not because it healed, but because my body was busy dealing with something else. Me. I had become my own problem, and that was harder to externalize, harder to point at and say, that's the enemy. Some nights I sat alone in my apartment and tried to articulate what I'd actually wanted from the whole thing. Did I want him to suffer? Did I want to feel powerful? Did I want to feel seen? I couldn't find a clean answer, which made the whole thing feel even more pointless. I had risked ruining my life. For what? Not justice, not closure, not peace, just a brief, ugly moment of acting out, and now I had to live with the version of myself who had done it, whether anyone else ever found out or not. About a week after the fire, I ran into Evan. Not at the strip mall, not in some dramatic confrontation, at a gas station. I was grabbing coffee before a morning job, half asleep, trying to function like a normal human. I heard a voice behind me say, "Damn, this line's slow as hell." I recognized it instantly, that casual, mildly annoyed tone. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like missing a step on a staircase. I turned. It was him. Same guy, same haircut, same relaxed posture. But he looked different. Not broken, not devastated, just irritated, tired, human. For a split second, I wondered if he knew, if he was looking at me differently because of something I couldn't see. But his expression didn't change. No narrowing of the eyes. No sudden tension. Just a stranger in line. We made brief eye contact. That's it. No recognition. No accusation. No dramatic irony from his side. From mine, it felt like standing 5 feet away from a ghost I'd created. My brain went into overdrive. He doesn't know. He suspects nothing. You're safe. And layered underneath that, you did this to him. I noticed small details I never would have cared about before. Dark circles under his eyes, a grease stain on his sleeve, the fact that he kept checking his phone, probably coordinating rides, insurance, work, something. I imagined his morning, waking up, remembering his car is unusable, rearranging his entire day around a problem I had created. It was impossible not to connect those dots. When it was his turn at the register, he paid, grabbed his coffee, and left. No big speech. No karmic lightning bolt. Just a guy dealing with a bad week. I stood there staring at the counter long after it was my turn. The cashier had to repeat herself. That encounter messed with me more than any hypothetical police investigation, because it stripped away the abstraction. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't a logo. He wasn't an idea. He was just a person who had annoyed me, outcompeted me, and unknowingly become the target of my worst impulses. I drove to my job in silence. No music, no podcasts, nothing. Just me and my thoughts. For the first time, I felt something close to genuine remorse. Not fear-based remorse. Not, I hope I don't get caught remorse. Actual regret. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness. The kind that just sits there heavy and useless. I wanted to undo it. Not hide it, not justify it. Undo it. Which, of course, isn't an option. That realization hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because it meant I couldn't fix this. I could only decide what kind of person I was going to be after doing something unforgivable. That felt like a much harder question than whether I was capable of doing it in the first place. After running into Evan, I couldn't keep pretending he was just a symbol. The truth was simple. I hurt someone because I felt powerless. Not justified. Not noble. Just small and angry. Since no one confronted me, I had a choice. Rewrite the story so I was still the good guy. Or admit I'd done something wrong. I chose the second. Quietly. No confession. No redemption arc. Just I did a bad thing. I'm capable of bad things. That doesn't mean I have to stay that person. I made small changes, raised prices, took extra work, stopped checking Evan's business, avoided the strip mall. None of it felt heroic, but it felt forward. The secret stayed. It still does. Getting away with something isn't freedom. It just means you become your own witness forever. Nothing in my life visibly collapsed. No arrest. No scandal. But inside, things shifted. My anger turned inward. My mistakes felt heavier. I lost the comfort of believing I was above certain lines. I became more cautious with my thoughts, especially fantasies about people getting what they deserve. I stopped trusting my anger. I realized bad people don't look like monsters. They look like normal people having bad days who make one terrible choice, including me. I don't know how much I affected Evan's life. Not knowing is part of the punishment. The biggest change is this: I no longer define myself by good intentions. I define myself by restraint. 2 years later, a friend casually said he'd never done anything unforgivable. I almost told him I had. The words reached my throat and stopped. I imagined his face changing. The permanent label, William, who did that? I stayed quiet. I felt relief, then shame. I wanted to feel lighter without risking anything. I still don't know if telling would be brave or selfish. Carrying this alone has made me quieter and less judgmental. Sometimes I imagine a version of reality where I got caught, where there was a clear punishment and an end. In this reality, there is no end. Just memory. Legally? Yes. Psychologically? No. The person who did it still exists inside me. Not loudly, not constantly, but permanently. I used to think evil felt evil. It doesn't. It feels justified. Logical. That's the terrifying part. So, did I get away with it? If away means no handcuffs, sure. If it means untouched, absolutely not. You don't leave something like this unchanged. If you're feeling the kind of resentment that starts turning into fantasy, pause. Acting on it will not fix your life. It won't restore dignity or balance anything. It will only add a private scar. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to not make things worse on purpose. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. I know this. That night didn't save me. It didn't help me. It only gave me something heavy to carry. So, if you're at the edge of doing something you know is wrong, walk away. Humans don't need more private ghosts. They need fewer.